Thank you so much. I'm going to try in the next hour, and I'll give you some time later on to ask any question you find fit. If you wish, just write the questions during my lecture in the chat, and maybe later on someone will just uh, try to figure out the most interesting questions so that we will try to address as much as possible. Okay. So the idea is to give you some sense of what's happening at the moment worldwide. Well, all of us, we are all feeling that something really huge is in the making. And I don't think there is one single person at the moment that really understands what's happening. So what I'm going to try to do is just to connect some dots and try to, make some sense, some clear picture of what's happening at the moment in order really to try and understand the trends that are in front of us. Now, saying that, I'm really stressing that it's really a very early stage to really understand what's happening. So I'm just going to try and collect some data in order to show you first how we can understand the future and most importantly try to figure out what might happen. But I'm not sure this is the only picture a person can make off from the few anecdotes that I'm going to collect. But we have to try, and we cannot say, well, it's too confusing, it's too chaotic, and nobody knows what might happen. Saying that, I'm going to try and address two questions, put them in mind during my talk, because I will try to somehow give some answers to those two questions. The first is what's happening in the world order that is is putting the order at least of the last 80 years since World War II into crisis. There is something behind that, the rationale of the order, of the world order, that probably is in crisis. And if I will be able to tell something that is logical to what's happening, then I'll be able to a little bit extrapolate the trends and try to see what might emerge from the crisis that we're going to see in the next decade. I'm going to focus on only the next decade, which is much more important to all of you. Okay, these are the two questions. Now, I would like to stress a lot of things are happening, but I'm going to try to, collect and merge a few anecdotes and make some sense of those anecdotes. Of course, the most important thing is what's happening with Hamas. What is it exactly driving Hamas to act as they have acted in 2023 and the way they are acting nowadays? What what is it exactly the Houthis are heading to? What drives them? If you go, well, how come Trump took office? Something that was really a surprise with such a landslide taking over. Of course, how come he's speaking about Greenland? And how come he's speaking about Panama again? What's happening here? And if you take all of these and connect them to Israel, you will see that just in 2024, the Israeli market has done so well, exactly the opposite of everyone was thinking. The bourse in Israel was the second worldwide to make more than 30% up. Only in 2024, in a year of such a devastating war. And if you wish, how come the Israeli shekel is uh, so good in the last decade, and especially in last year? Okay, I'm not sure you are all familiar about the what's happening in this subject matter, but the best at least as far as I know at the moment, the best currency at the moment worldwide is the Swiss currency. The second one is the Israeli shekel. So if you take all those things and try to make sense of all of them as a whole unit, something that is connected, it is very hard at the moment. But I'm going to try and make some sense of this kind of a chaotic phenomena that we see in at least in the last few months or year. Now, put in mind something else. This is a study that was just published lately. And what they found is that the year 2024 was the most violent year in terms of world conflict with a lot of casualties from since World War II. And if you want to see it in numbers, that's really frightening. We're speaking about at least 200,000 casualties only in 2024 from different wars all over the world. And nobody is counting yet exactly the number of casualties that Russia is having in the last year, because nobody knows the real numbers. But since World War II, we didn't see such an aggression worldwide that is happening in something like more than 50 separate conflicts all over the world, in around something like a little bit less than 100 countries that are engaged in very aggressive and bloody conflicts. And what really makes it so bizarre is that almost all those conflicts are connected. So something big is happening, and I'm going to try to give at least one explanation of what's happening in order to a little bit foresee what might happen in the next decade. Now, let me say the bottom line of my lecture. We as futurists, we really love crisis because we think that crisis is a very important phenomena that drives systems to continue and evolve. Without crisis, the systems don't think they need to evolve. They don't think they need to fine tune their procedures or their institutions, etc., etc. So what I would like to give you an idea to think about is how the next decade, even though we're going to see something very important shifting in world order, actually we're going to see in the next decade the seeds of the next world order that will take humanity to higher levels of economic integration, everything. It's exactly what happened after World War II. World War II was the driver of the existing world order that brought humanity to amazing levels of integration and economic advances, etc., etc. So this is exactly what we're going to see. The next decade is going to be very stressful, but in the next decade itself, we're going to see the seeds of the world order that is much more advanced than the world order we have seen up to now in the last 80 years at least. Okay. Now, a lot of people are speaking about futures and trends. And unfortunately, not all those people that are speaking about the future, not all of them are aware or are doing that kind of thinking with a very clear and validated methodology with which you can somehow extrapolate the trends. So I'm going really very briefly mention the methodology with which I'm going to collect those anecdotes into a little bit clearer picture that will at least try to point to the real and realistic, if you wish, trends in the next decade. That this methodology has been written more than a century ago. And in the last 40, 50 years, it was put aside by a lot of researchers. Now it is emerging back in the stage of scientific understanding of how civilizations are emerging. And if I were to, to put it in a very simple way, think about the globe as something that has a core of resources, and around that core of resources, you can see that most you see the red uh, core of resources. It's called the land power, and around that core of resource, most of the resources that humans have been looking for in the last millennia are actually in this piece of land on the globe, and around that piece of land most of humanity are residing. Okay, and what this methodology is saying that is that for millennia people were competing around that piece of land in order to pick and to have part of those resources for the benefits of their offsprings. This is, generally speaking, if you want to summarize thousands of years of conflict worldwide, that is somehow driven by that need of each one of us to collect as much as possible resources for a better living, and of course for the betterment of the lives of our offsprings. By the way, there was a very interesting research study that was done very lately, and they found the core, the middle of the spot around which most of humanity is residing. It's a very small village in Myanmar, and around that village, about 3,000 kilometers wide, most of humanity is residing. More than half of humans are actually sitting there. A lot of people are actually looking even to move to that area because it is closer to what humanity is considering vital resources. Now, there are a lot of terms to that idea. You can see here some books that are elaborating on this methodology. But generally speaking, remember that on that area, here you see the area in yellow, and around that area in yellow, actually there were a lot of wars during the last thousands of years, and the red area is where most of humanity is residing. And if we are speaking about gas and oil, more than 80% of gas is there, more than 55, 57% of oil is there, and most of humanity is trying to somehow collect part of those resources. This is, generally speaking, the methodology with which I'm going to try and bring together some anecdotes, some interesting things, and some bizarre things that are happening in the last year or two, and make sense of what might develop later on. Okay, so let's see how this methodology explains what happened in the last 80 years. Okay, World War II, I don't know if you remember how many people died in World War I. As far as we know, there are different, numbers floating around. As far as we know, in World War One, there were more than 30 million people that died. About a third of those casualties were civilians. World War II, however, we speak about more than 72 million people that died, and one third only were military personnel, and two-thirds were civilians, which is mind-boggling what humanity has done in the 20th century. After World War II, a lot of thinkers and geostrategists started thinking, how can we stop this vicious cycle of wars that are part of humanity? It's already millennia. Okay, the World War II was, of course, devastating, and most of the nations were in shock of what we were able to do to each other. Okay, even the Americans were really in shock when they realized what they did in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima. And they had even a third bomb. But since they suddenly realized what happened, they didn't go further with the third bomb. So everybody was in shock, and a lot of people started thinking, how can we stop those those crucial events, those aggressive events that we were a part of in history. And they came with an idea. Okay, that idea was, I'm stressing the point, was the perspective of the Western world that were the winners of that war. Okay, they came with the idea that for millennia, humanity and humans are competing to reach that area of resources. And time after time, a group that found that there is a resource they needed in another part of the globe of that or at that area, they looked to have some of those resources, and if they couldn't find any kind of discussion without being aggressive, they became very aggressive. They took over whatever they want. They were very cruel to that group of people that used to have that resource, and it didn't took much longer until the losers got some more strength back, and they did what the winners in the previous time did. This is exactly what we have seen after World War One. The Germans lost, and they were treated not so nicely, and they were asked to pay for whatever they did, and then it took only 20 years until the Germans said, "Okay, now our turn to do to you what you did to us." So the thinkers, and we call them nowadays geostrategists, those people came and said, how can we stop that vicious cycle of winners and losers that are constantly, taking over of each other? And they said, let's try not to be cruel to the losers, but let's try to help the losers feel that they don't lack anything. Okay, so they devised an idea that they need to help the losers feel that they don't need to recover and try to do to the winners what they did to them in the previous cycle of aggressions. And what they came with was what all of us are familiar today, the Marshall projects with Germany, with Japan, but still helping the losers You need trillions of dollars, and that's not the idea to constantly help somebody that lost a war. The idea was to build a platform, a world platform, upon which nobody feels that he lacks anything. And this is where we started developing what we called up to now the globalization markets, upon which all of us, every nation, every group, if that group needed something, needed a kind of any kind of resource, that group will look around worldwide and will be able to go and sign a treaty with that nation in order for that nation to share and to sell part of their resources. This is what we have seen in the last 80 years. We have developed, actually, the nation that developed the system, the world system, was most of it is the Americans. They said to themselves, we need to open the globe so that all resources will be able to move from one place to another place without no one being able to steal those resources in their way to each other. Okay, because stealing resources was a phenomena for millennia that the humanity could not somehow eliminate. So the idea was that everyone can reach every part on the globe, most of it through the seas, because this is where really we are treading already for centuries. And the idea was that all the seas will be open, and everybody will be able to move around those seas without fearing that someone will attack them or will steal from them whatever they have reached upon. Okay, this platform needs a lot of resources. So the Americans took upon themselves to police this world platform that is most of it is on the seas, so that nobody will fear that someone will somehow steal from them what they have reached and what they have bought from another person. But still, that platform does not is not enough. The idea was to develop a a, a world let's say system with which no one will feel that they are excluded from having whatever they need, which is what we call at the moment the World Trade Organization. Okay, everybody, more than 160 nations nowadays are part of World Trade Organization, in which there are no constraints from to buy anything you wish without tariffs and without having to pay extra money more than anybody else. That also is not enough. These geostrategists came with the idea that they need to build international institutes, that if there are any differences, you go and solve those differences in those institutes instead solving them in the battlefield. And this is what we have developed in the last 80 years, from the UN to the World Trade Organization to the Hague, a lot of international institutes. Now, what happens in the last few years is that system is in crisis, and we tend to think that there are a few landmarks that cause the system to be in crisis. Okay, the first one, of course, is when the USSR has collapsed, and suddenly a lot of people said, okay, that's it. There are no more wars worldwide. There was even a very known person that wrote a book titled the end of civilization, which means that's it. There are no wars. Everybody knows that the Western world and liberal thinking and economic openness is the system that is sustainable. And nobody is going, and the platform, the world platforms are already established, and there won't be any more wars anywhere. This is one landmark. The other landmark, as far as a lot of people are thinking, is when Xi Jinping took office in China. It was in 2012, and it looks like Xi Jinping is coming from a different kind of idea of what is it exactly world order. And he said to himself, okay, the West were very aggressive and very cruel toward China in the 19th century. Now it's our turn to take over the world order. And bit by bit, the Chinese started developing a strategy to be very dominant at the beginning, very dominant in world order. And step by step, the US, first of all, it was Barack Obama that suddenly realized that the Chinese are not just trying to take part in the world order, they would like to take over world order. Okay, and of course, when Trump uh, took office the first time, he was the one to bring the attention of the world that the Chinese are really willing to take over world order and decide and input a lot of their ideas and their values into the world order. Another landmark which is crucial in that process of a crisis building within the system is when Putin invaded Ukraine. It is a crucial point probably in history because he actually Putin caused the collapse of the idea that was developed after World War II, that each nation has the sovereignty on their borders and no nation is allowed to take another nation's border. And even though before he invaded Ukraine, he signed an agreement with the Ukrainians that in order for them not to be part of NATO, and in order for the Ukrainians to give back the nuclear, let's say, materials back to Russia, he signed with them a very clear agreement that he will not invade them. And still he invaded, which means that nobody anymore now is can count on the sovereignty of different of nations. This is a cruel. In history, it's very hard to see beforehand those landmarks that are crucial in the development of a trend. Just think about how the when how the World War One has started when someone killed another diplomat in somewhere in Europe. Nobody at the moment thought that that's a very important landmark, but after a while, you start realizing how those landmarks accumulate to huge change in world affairs. So this is probably the idea of how come what we see now is that the world order as we have seen it up to now is in deep troubles. Some people say that it has already collapsed. Some people say No, it didn't collapse, but it is in trouble. We need to, to take uh, take care of it and fine tune world order, the current world order. By the way, Germany is going to be the symbol of the collapse of the old paradigm that when you lack something, yeah, somebody else is having what you're lacking, and therefore you need to go negotiate to have part of what the other party is having. And if you are familiar of what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, the prices of oil skyrocketed in many places worldwide, and Germany was the first to be hit by those by those prices, and a lot of people during that first winter had to pay uh, fascinating or mind-boggling numbers for electricity at that first winter. So this is basically trying to understand what's happening. Okay, it doesn't say that we really understand what's happening, but something in the making, because what it is emerging from this crisis is that there are something like four groups that are emerging and competing in to try and take over the next phase of world order. By the way, you can see here what happened in the last 50 years in terms of globalization. The more the country is I believe you see it as blue or black, the more that country was much more integrated worldwide. If you take a look what happened just 50 years after that, you see how the world has become very connected and very advanced. You can see all over the world that, life expectancy has emerged, economic growth, everything has peaked in numbers that it was a dream in just after World War II. What is what is really interesting to note is that most of the nations that took advantage of globalization were not the nations that were already all globalized. You can see it here in numbers. Those nations that were developing nations, not developed nations, took made much more from globalization than the nation that were the ones that developed the idea of the global world. And bit by bit, a lot of nations started thinking that a lot of other nations not only are taking advantage of the platform, the global platform that they have developed, but they would like to take over that platform and push away the nations that were generated that global platform. Of course, if you wish, the US is a very symbolic nation that bit by bit started to feel that globalization is working against their interest, not helping them being much more advanced. A lot of Americans feel that in the last 50 years, life and economic advantage, everything is shrinking. And many other nations are feeling that globalization brought them to higher levels of development. So there are, as I said, four blocks that are competing and trying to understand and trying to have a say that will emerge in the next phase of world order. The first block, of course, are the democratic, those open nations, liberal nations. Most of them are Western, even though it's not exactly a Western world. That block of nations is organizing themselves at the moment in some some alliances to protect themselves from the nations that are willing, the other blocks that are willing to take over the next world order. If you, as you see here, there are a lot of names, a lot of acronyms, and from Australia, New Zealand to India, a lot of groups that are organizing themselves. By the way, most of them are feeling that they cannot anymore rely on global markets in order to receive whatever they need. They need to take care of their energy security and food security. And of course, if you have heard that when Russia invaded Ukraine, there were some nations that were devastated because even though they bought already and they paid already for grains coming from Ukraine, they could not receive what they paid for because Russia has blockaded the sea, the Black Sea, and no ship was able to take uh, those grains to a lot of nations that are really in a very difficult situation because of a lot of reasons. If you take, for example, Egypt, they were almost devastated because for a while they didn't have grain to feed their population. So bit by bit, nations are organizing themselves in some kind of local blocks to take care of their needs and take care of their food and energy security. This is the first block. The other block, of course, is known to be the non-democratic democratic nations. Some of them are organized through the BRICS, okay? And the BRICS is trying also to enlarge its memberships. And most of those nations are either autocratic or non-democratic or a lot of different kinds of organizing civil organizations. Okay, this is the second block. They are much more known not only through the BRICS acronym, but nowadays we know that they are Russia and Iran and North Korea and some nations in something like the middle of South Africa, something like 14 nations in the middle of South Africa, and of course South America, uh, something like 12 out of 14 nations are already part of that bloc that is trying to bring their agenda to the world, the next world order. That's the second block. There is a third block that is called, it had a title, it's called the Poor South. Okay, you can see here a list of something like 100 nations worldwide that are very poor, and the country that is willing to lead that bloc is India, trying to bring their interest into the table when the next phase of world order will emerge. Most of those nations feel that their voice is not heard or was not heard up to now, and India is willing to be the leader of that group of nations. And there is a fourth block of entities, which is, from my point of view, is the most frightening as far as I understand, which is called the most powerful tech companies. There is a group of technology companies that have immense power, soft power. They don't have armies, but they have soft power that they can do things we couldn't even imagine before. They know what we think, they know what we do, they know what we buy, they know what we sell, they know what we might be thinking even in the future. And those companies are organizing themselves to be a bloc with a lot of power in the next phase of world order. Now, I don't think they will be in the forefront of the world order. They are much smarter than we think. They don't want to take care of our daily life. They don't want to be to collect garbage from cities. That's not what they would like to do. Okay, so what they might do is some kind of a combination of power, some kind of agreements um, with the politicians of nowadays, and be in the back of a lot of decision makings. If you wish, Elon Musk today and Trump is just this, an initial model of this kind of blog that might emerge in the future. So these are the four optional blocks that are competing to take over the next phase of world order. And in the next decade, we're going to see a lot of them competing not just diplomatically, but also very aggressively. Most of the people that are emerged in understanding the next stages of these conflicts, and they are already in conflict, those four blocks worldwide. People that are thinking what might happen, they think that 2025 is a landmark, an optional landmark of very aggressive moves of part of those blocks. 2027, very important. And at best, at most, 2035 is the climax of something big that will either bring down the current world order or the climax of if you wish, I don't want to use hard words, but the climax of uh, of great power that are colliding together, and nobody knows the way it will be seen, or it will be demonstrated in world affairs. But most of the experts that are looking at those four blocks and how they integrate or play each other and play together speak about the next decade is a crucial decade in which a lot of things will happen, from which we will emerge to the next stage of world order. Now, saying all of this, I don't want to frighten you, because that's not the idea. The idea is to try to see history from above, and see if from any crisis what might emerge from a crisis, as I said at the beginning, that will be very beneficial to humanity. So as I said at the beginning, the problem of this concept of that devised and drove the current world order is that trade needs to be open all over the world. And as we all know, most of the trade is being done through the seas. You can see here the maritime trade routes, which are fascinating to see from above. By the way, nowadays it's not only ships are that are moving around, but even our backbone of information trading is done through the seas or down the seas through huge silicon routes that, it's fascinating to see what humanity has been able to do just in the last 30 years under the sea to move ideas. At this very moment, we all share ideas because through the seas, that information is moving in light speed. Now, the problem with the seas is that there are strongholds, choke points, through which humanity had to move during at least the last 500 years since we started moving around on the seas. And those choke points, around those choke points, there are always conflicts, at least in the last 500 years. There are some of those choke points that are man-made. The idea was to open the seas as much as possible so that the conflict will reside in history. And what we are going to see is, because of the crisis in the next decade, we're going to see how humanity is going to open more and more choke points, man-made choke points. And through and with those new man-made choke points worldwide, we're going to develop the next phase of world order that will facilitate trade in manners humanity have not seen, uh, never have seen. Okay, let me just do a zoom in on 2 or 3 choke points just to demonstrate how those choke points are becoming stressed, and they are bringing a lot of stress to world order, and the way humanity is going to solve that stress in the next decade. Okay, you are all familiar, I believe, with the Strait of Malacca, a very important choke point worldwide. It's not a man-made choke point, but it's a crucial choke point. A lot of experts are saying that in that choke point, we're going to see the next conflict between the first 2 blocks that I have mentioned before. Let me give you some sense of what the Strait of Malacca is. Okay, this is the Strait of Malacca. All right. If you wish, this is the South China Sea. China is over here. India is over here. And a lot of trade is moving from east to west through the Strait of Malacca. Okay, the Strait of Malacca is between Indonesia and Malaysia. And at the tip of it, it's Singapore. Its length is more than 900 kilometers, and it starts with something like 38 kilometer wide and goes to about 4 kilometer wide at its tip, where exactly Singapore is situated. Singapore became an amazing country, even though a very small country, because all that all that movement of ships actually needs to come to Singapore and receive a lot of services, and from those services, Singapore became very rich in a matter of only 50 years. This is the Strait of Malacca. Take a look how important is the Strait of Malacca. About 2/3 of the maritime trade of the Chinese move through the Strait of Malacca. 2/3. About 1/3 of the trade of the Japanese trade move through that strait, and about 1/3 of global maritime trade move through that Strait of Malacca. So if something happens to that strait, either by the Chinese or by the Americans or by the Indians. If someone would like to bring down, for example, the Chinese economy in a matter of 18 months, if someone will block the Strait of Malacca, let's say, will bring some warships at this spot over here, then in a matter of 18 months only, China will go to its knees because it will not have enough resources to continue developing and taking care of its population. If you wish, more than 80% of the Chinese energy cross the Malacca Strait. 80%. Oh, everything comes from the Middle East, of course. Okay, and something like 30% of the Japanese needs, energy needs, etc., etc., etc. Okay, what you see, that actually two-thirds. Okay, and about three-quarters of oil consumption worldwide move through the Malacca Strait. So if something happens to the Malacca Strait, the world is in shambles. Okay, so the Chinese, of course, know it, and there are a few things that they are already doing, and that raises the tension worldwide. One of them is that in South China Sea here, okay, the Chinese took over almost most of the South China seas, and they have developed seven islands, artificial islands, upon which they put a lot of military services and units in order for, if someone will try to block the Malacca Strait, they will have enough military force to react to that blockade. This is one thing they have already done. The other thing that they are thinking of doing is to taking over Taiwan, and the idea is so that nobody will be able to block this part of the seas, so that China will not be able to trade through the sea towards South America and North America. This is crucial. This is the reason why they would like, and they are planning to take over Taiwan. Even though not many people speak about this reason, most of the people that speak about the reason they are willing to take Taiwan is just because they feel it's part of China, and it used to be always part of China. This is one reason, but it's a narrative. This is a political narrative. The real reason is they are afraid that the Americans will blockade China from Japan here through the Philippines with some warships, and those warships will not allow any trade coming out from China to South America, for example. Okay, so this is one choke point that is raising a lot of alarms with a lot of people. The moment a lot of people think that the moment China will, they don't need to take over Taiwan. It's really, in any case, it's a nightmare to take over Taiwan. They need just to blockade Taiwan. And blockading Taiwan means that they will blockade Taiwan exactly at the point that will be actually a point that nobody will be able to blockade them, which is two things in one military move. This is one choke point that is raising a lot of concern with a lot of people, and this is something that we might see in the next decade accumulating to some kind of aggressive movements. This is one way. The other one is how actually we are reacting to those choke points. This is what I said before, that it is important to see how a crisis is the springboard to the next phase of development of humanity. And what I'm going to show you is how those choke points. Here you see exactly was some of the other choke points. You see this is India. This is another choke point I did speak about. This is the Malacca Strait. These are very other choke points I didn't have the time to go over. So let's see how we are trying to do some proactive moves so that the crisis will not bring down humanity altogether, but will be a springboard towards the next phase of development. And this is something that is very important also to Israel and explains what is happening at the moment here in the Middle East. One of the ways to tackle the most important choke point that brings a lot of trade and energy from Europe to the east is, of course, through the through Egypt. Okay, as we all are familiar, through Egypt, a lot of trade is going from China to Europe. And the idea is to develop new trade routes. And this is the idea that is behind the Abraham Accords. Developing a trade route from India towards the Emirates, moving through railroads and other kind of roads through Saudi Arabia. It will cross Jordan and will go to Haifa, and from Haifa it will go to Italy and to the and to Europe, crossing and not having to cross what is now actually almost being blocked by the Houthis over here. Okay, so put in mind that since the US is organizing the world with blocks, the idea of the block of the Abraham Accord is to develop a block of nation that will develop new alternatives to what the trade routes of nowadays, and be a block of nation that will stop the aggression of China if they will try to take over those kind of trade routes. This is very important to understand, because as far as we understand, the Iranians and the Russians, when they saw that Israel was about to sign a treaty with Saudi Arabia, they actually were driven to start what we have seen in the last almost a year and a half. And part of it, of course, is what we have seen in Gaza and what we have seen with Hezbollah. They were trying to stop that agreement not to materialize, because they understand the importance of that agreement. This is one way to see what's happening. If you wish, just a couple days ago, Trump said that he have signed already with India and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia that they will start developing what you see here, new trade routes that will circumvent the Egyptian crossing over there, and it will probably open new ways of trades in the future. It will take a decade or a couple decades to establish. Some say that it might take not more than 5 years, but I'm taking a different view to timetables to those kinds of projects. And here we see how a crisis of nowadays is actually developing the seeds of the next phase that will open Earth towards much more integration with each other. That's one example. The other example is what the Chinese are trying to do. In order not to rely totally on the Malacca Strait, they are opening new routes from China to Myanmar and buying different kinds of seaports in different places worldwide. Here we see another route they are developing. Here we see another route through Russia towards Europe. And if you see, a lot of things are happening. They are moving mountains in order to build new roads and new railroads in mountains in order to have different and other options to move goods and to move resources in the future. There is one more thing which is really important, and I will give you some time to ask, which is what we call the global trade routes of the 22nd century. What you have seen now is the next decade or two, but already at the moment we are thinking about the huge projects that are going to shape civilization of the 22nd century. And everything is because, let's say, Hamas and Hezbollah and that have started something that we thought it's only regional, but actually it's not regional. So take a look at this, okay? The other choke point, which is very important to the Americans, is of course the Panama Canal. Okay, Panama Canal, as you see it, Panama was a nation that broke from Colombia, and the Americans were the ones to help Panama to establish their sovereignty. And part of the agreement was that Panama will let the US build a canal that will be able to connect the two oceans together, from which or with which or through which they will be able to move trade and to move military equipment both to the Pacific and the Atlantic. The problem with the Panama Canal is it was the most sophisticated engineering project that probably has ever done. And in order to succeed in building the Panama Canal, more than 50,000 people died in working in that canal. The canal is built in a very interesting way, and that's the reason it was really something of a great achievement to humanity and specifically to the US. And this is why Trump is so eager to take it back. Okay, because it's, first of all, it's crucial to world trade and much more crucial to the US security, from energy security to food security, trade security, and of course, military security. The canal is built in a very interesting way. You see it in some kind of three levels that each ship needs to go up, travel through a lake, and then go down back to the other side of Panama. Here is a nice way to explain it. In order for a ship to cross the canal, it needs to come, let's say, to over here. They will close one part of the canal and will fill it with a lot of water so that the ship will go up, and then it will move to the next level, and doing the same thing, it will move to the third level, and then it has to go through the Gatun Lake and again go down three levels. For each ship that had to cross this amazing project, it takes about a few hours. I don't remember exactly how many hours, and it cost about $150,000 to $300,000 each ship. The problem with the Gatun Lake is that it is it is becoming very stressed because there's not enough rain. They used to use a lot of water from that lake in order to bring up and down those ships. And for many years, the average ships daily that moved through that canal was something like 32, 36 ships daily uh, because of of the water that is receding in the lake. There were times in the last couple of years that only 18 ships moved daily over there. Now they have peaked a little bit back towards 24, 26 ships. Nonetheless, it's less than it used to be. And there are a lot of people that are concerned about it. First of all, Trump is concerned because what happened is there is an agreement. The U.S. gave up the canal to the Panamanians in 2000, and the agreement was that they will not give it to anyone, and it will be neutral to anyone worldwide that wants to can cross without any constraints. And what the Chinese have been doing lately in the last actually 20 years or so is they have bought around the canal a lot of properties, and they have invested a lot of money in national projects. And the Americans are very afraid that they have the capacity, if they wish, to block the canal if they wish to, or if let's say if the U.S. will block the Malacca Strait, they will be able to block the Panama Canal also. It is very easy to block Panama Canal, by the way. It's only a matter of one ship that will just do a kind of an accident and will break one of those walls through which the canal, or with which ships are going from one level to another level. Okay, this is how it looks like. And the idea is that Panama need to take care of the Panama Canal. They have a lot of ideas, but nonetheless, Trump is very upset about the way they are taking care, and they are actually giving up their um, the way they manage that canal. And security wise, it's very troubling to the US that they feel that the Chinese are coming very close to their most important canal through which a lot of their trade is moving. um, Let me just show you another thing that will demonstrate how important it is. Through the Panama Canal, something like 40% of the trade that the US is having with the East is moving. About 40% of the trade is moving through the Panama Canal. 70% of the ships that are moving through the canal are Americans, and they have a lot of troubles seeing that from time to time the Panamanians are raising the price of that possibility to move through the canal. The problem is that it's becoming a choke point at the moment. A lot of ships are just waiting to move, and a lot of ships are even sometimes paying $1 or $3 million just to have the possibility to take the route first before other ships, and a lot of people are thinking that the only way to 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 solve the problem of the Panama is to start developing new ways to move trade from across the two oceans. So there are at the moment four options that are in the making. And these options, probably most of them will be realized in the next 30, 40 years, and they will be the springboard of the trade of the late 21st century, of course, the 22nd century. And this is again the way we understand how a crisis drives humanity to develop, to continue making civilization much more, or progress, let's say, in time. The first alternative is crossing through South America from Brazil to the other shore. The second one is through Colombia. The third one is through Nicaragua, and the fourth one is through Mexico. Let me elaborate a little bit, and then I'll give you some time to ask. Okay, these are the numbers as far as we know that might be the numbers of millions of containers that will be able to pass the alternatives of the Panama Canal, if and when they will be able to finish those projects. These are huge projects with a lot of money, a lot of opportunities, economic opportunities, geopolitical opportunities. The landscape of world order of mid 21st century and further is actually at the moment being devised. Okay, so the first alternative, it is already part of it is in the making. The Chinese have taken over that project totally, and they have built already part of it. It's a huge road that will combine, very regular routes and highways combined with railways, etc., that will crisscross that mid South America. The same thing with Colombia. The third alternative is Nicaragua, but Nicaragua is a failure. The Chinese have already invested more than $6 billion, and nothing is progressing over there, which is really something that a lot of people thought that this will be the end of that project. The most promising project that the US is part of, and it is already being built, is crossing the seas through Mexico. Let me see if I have, yes, I have one here. These are the first two options. Nicaragua, as I mentioned, and Nicaragua is something like the Suez Canal in terms of development, but nonetheless, they could not continue, and the Chinese have retreated from that project as far as we know. And the fourth project, of course, is isthmus, the isthmus of Tehuantepec in corridor in Mexico. You see here the routes that are combined together with the railroads, and part of it also canals. The idea is, if it will be done, then it will be a major achievement, and it will almost replace the Panama Canal if Panama will not be able to take care of the canal the more we progress in time. The idea is that the Mexican government will invest some $3 billion, and the Americans will put something similar. And you see here how Mexico actually is merging with North America in the second half of the 21st century, which is something that is mind-boggling at the moment. People think that there is tension between Mexico and the U.S., but it was always the case. There was always a tension between the U.S. and Mexico. As you know, the U.S. Conducted wars with Mexico and took over parts of Mexico a century and a half ago, and then less than that. And we are still in that momentum, so that most of North America will combine together with part of what is called at the moment South America, and we're going to see in the second century a new kind of integrations between nations, and of course it will bring a lot of peace to some regions. It will bring some development to other regions, and this is the big competition at the moment. And this competition is driven by what we have said at the beginning, the crisis of the next decade. And that crisis has emerged about 30 years ago with some landmarks in those 30 years. It peaked in the last couple years, beginning with the invasion of Ukraine and the invasion of Hamas towards Israel, and the establishment of the Abraham Accord. And you see that if you combine all those things together, you see a larger picture that, from my point of view at least, it is very optimistic, even though we're going to go through a decade of troubles. But it's only going to be a decade of troubles. So I think it gives you some sense how we can think. And let me finish with a very nice photo here. This is the US from above, from a satellite. A lot of experts are trying to understand how come the US became so powerful in the 20th century. And of course, starting in the 19th century. And when you see the US from above, you see that the US is totally crisscrossed by routes that did not have to be developed by humans, but by natural routes through rivers, etc., crisscrossing east-west, north-south. And a lot of experts say that this is one of the variables that made the US so powerful and so successful in terms of at least economic activities. The reason is they didn't have to invest a lot of money to connect the different parts of the US. Those routes were natural routes, and they used those natural routes to integrate the different parts of the nation, and that's what made the US so powerful economically, at least. Another thing is that from both sides of the continent, from the east and from the west, they were able to move through the seas, and you get something that is amazing historically. This is the first time in history, as far as we know, that a superpower didn't have to invest in routes in order to become a superpower. And this gives you some sense of how things are emerging in history. And since I am much more optimistic about humanity, there are a lot of people that are very pessimistic about humanity. I'm very optimistic about humanity. I'm trying to see what drives humanity to collide with each other, but also to emerge with each other. And of course, my look is much more broad. My perspective is much more larger than many other people, but I think it gives some sense of how history is developing and how civilization is emerging. I think that's enough. Let me give you some time to ask any questions, and I don't want to be stressing the time for all of you. Okay, so
Thank you
who wants
very
to
much,
ask?
Professor Passing. Yeah, we'll do it fast because we don't have much time. There's some questions on the chat as well. And then we have Ariel and Doreen.
Okay, who you want? Did you see the question? Would you like to pick up some
Yes,
questions? Go ahead.
yes, I will. So Saul from South Africa is asking, what is the definition of a crisis with regard to world order? What qualifies?
Well, I didn't understand. Do you understand? Can you explain the question for me?
Is my connection good? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so the question was, Saul, maybe you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Where's Saul? I don't see the question. Where is it?
Hi, Professor. Sorry, I have a bad connection, but
Okay.
maybe you'll hear
Right,
me.
Saul.
I said, what is the you spoke about the a crisis with regard to world order at the beginning of the lecture. What defines a crisis that would change world order?
Well, a crisis.
What fits into that category? What makes up a crisis?
Most of the experts, when they speak about a crisis, most of them speak about a the term is kinetic crisis, which means shooting with it on each other. If this is was the question, it's not just an economic crisis. It is really very aggressive. And those are the times that really consolidate the differences between groups. And unfortunately, they conduct some kind of aggressions, and then they are afraid, and then they are disappointed of what they did. And then they start really negotiations, trying to figure out how they can come out of that crisis. I hope I understand your question.
Saul, you had
Yeah,
a
you do. And
couple of more
can
questions.
I
If you want to ask,
can I just follow up that question?
yes, please.
With regard to the fourth block that you mentioned of soft powers, do you think that definition of a crisis with specifically shooting one power to another can change? And when do you think that will change?
Again, I don't think I understand the question. If you mean if soft power is enough in
If soft power is enough to cause a crisis, like a cyber attack, a banking attack, a trade
as
attack.
far as I understand, that's not enough. Humanity,
Thank you.
generally speaking, humanity, there is another pattern we have found in history. It's a cycle of 80 years. It always starts with a great war and ends with a great war. And from 80 years to 80 years, we continue developing our institutes, our moralities, everything is continuing developing, but the cycle is about 80 years. This is exactly, by the way, what we see at the moment. 80 years between World War One and those that say that we are already in World War Three. And World War Three will have some, I was lately in India, and the people say over there, a very important person said to me, we have around India 100 points of clashes between groups. Warm, hot clashes, which means with fire guns. 100. So it is happening already. And what we see, what we have seen in Gaza, what we have seen in Ukraine, this is it exactly. It's not just soft power. Another question?
Yes. So we have Victor. Victor is here.
Where is
Yes,
Hello.
Victor is here.
Victor? I see. Whose
Yes.
idea was IMEC? This
Yeah,
is your
this is
question?
actually my second question.
Okay, what's your first question?
The first question is, why does the West don't talk so much about the Silk Road that China tries to rebuild right now by buying harbors across all of Europe? Um, Although it's a major threat for the whole West if they complete it.
Well, everybody's speaking about it. Okay? The Silk Road is the least frightening. What is really frightening is the road through the Arctics. If they will be able to move ships in a few months yearly when the ice will recede, then that's really a game change. Everybody is speaking about it, and this is the reason Trump is speaking about taking over Greenland. That's exactly the point. He wants an outpost so that he will be able to control whatever is moving in the pole.
Okay, got you. And the second one is, I wanted to know more about iMac. Today is the first time I heard about it.
Well, you have to, we don't have time. Just,
Okay,
type it on the internet. You'll be able to read tons of things about it.
okay, got it. Thank you.
Another question?
Yes. Next one we have Martin.
Yes. Hi, Professor. My question is, what role does education play in relation to development, and specifically in relationship in the fourth group of nation you mentioned, the companies?
Well, the more we are educated, that's the better. That's always the case. Unfortunately, though, we are in a time that education is, we think it's an open system in education. But because of it, of the technologies and their unique algorithms, education is becoming education in terms of mind opening, okay, which is the most important thing in education, is becoming very hard to deliver because the algorithm is all actually engulfing you with ideas and knowledge that they think the algorithm think this is what you like to, or you would like to be part or to consume. That's the problem. This is what's frightening about those big companies. Okay, and it will be some kind of reaction against them, but not in the next decade. The next decade are going to be part of the great clash between those four blocks, the three other blocks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Now we have Alexandre, and then we'll move forward to Doreen. Alexandre, you wanna ask your question?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, David. I wanted to ask about about everything you said, which of the accords have more relation to Israel? Like, which one Israel will be more affected? That's why I asked when you were showing the map from the Indian trade that goes through India, through Arab countries, and through Israel. Um, Regarding the whole thing, which of the order affects more Israel itself?
Well, the US is organizing different blocks that are much more regional. Okay, the AUKUS, for example, the Abraham Accord is the most important one in the Middle East. When, and it's not only if, it's only a matter of when Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords, the Middle East will change, totally change. Okay, in a matter of a decade or two, it will be a very different Middle East, economically, geopolitically, everything. And this is what is really frightening Iran and frightening Russia and frightening China. They know it. Okay, so Abraham Accord is very important, and this is why Israel is putting a lot of efforts on it. Darin.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Professor. Thank you very much for this huge and interesting content. My question is regarding, I'm sorry for this because maybe it could seem like a very Frenchy or European question, but what about
Say it in French and I will understand.
No, like regarding the concerns, because in Europe we are very concerned about environmental and climate risk events, and because we're moving to a world where there will be a lot more climate risk events, I'm wondering regarding the how we will be able to consider all this all the evolution of the relations between countries. Regarding economic growth, business, maybe a lot of new taxation regarding all the like non-environmental friendly movements all around the world. And I was thinking about all these new changes regarding climate risk. Maybe there will be less economic growth and maybe less exchange. And regarding this, what will be the next topics on which we'll be able to get some to do some pressure in order to win some diplomatic or relation conflicts? I don't know if it's clear. Like I'm thinking this was very interesting because we understood how till today we are able to make some pressure, for instance, with the Houthis, and to get these economic pressures with all Abraham deals and Saudi Arabia. But tomorrow, what will be our new way of pressure if there is no more or less, let's say less business topics and less exchanges all around the world?
Okay, if I understand what you're saying is how uh, how Europe is going to feel these global trends since they are much more immersed in very specific issues. They don't.
Yeah.
What I get from you is that the Europeans are not really understanding those global issues, and they are much more concentrated on just Europe or just one topic, let's say the warming of our environment, etc. But
Sure. Yeah.
as far as I understand,
Yeah.
Europe, the Europeans, I'm speaking about two different people. Okay, there is the leadership of Europe at the moment, and there is the Europeans. There is a gap between how the civilians understand the issues and how the leaders understand the issues. Until 2 years ago, both of them, they were kind of at the same table. And the most pressing issue for the leaders now is Russia. They all understand that Ukraine is not the end of this conflict. They understand that Russia will take over the eastern part of Europe again, exactly as it was after World War II. And they are preparing themselves for a war. You probably heard a lot of from Macron to everybody else that is speaking that we need to prepare the next war. The civilians are not there yet. They are still thinking about how do we integrate together, how we feel a little bit more secure. That's it. But most of the Europeans, I believe, they are missing the larger picture and the forces that are working on Russia. How come Russia is becoming so aggressive? How come Russia is organizing a bloc that is challenging NATO, challenging the Western world? Most of the people are not awakened yet to see what drives those nations. And from at least the methodology I have listed here, the Russians, exactly like the Chinese, are saying, okay, now it's our time to be the leader of the next world order. You, the West, were the leader of the last world order. Now it's our time. Okay, exactly replicating that cycle I was speaking about at the beginning. And the majority of the civilians in Europe really don't understand it. Unfortunately, it's like they were very much surprised how how Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, in one of my books that was written 15 years ago, I said it very clearly. Russia will invade Ukraine at the beginning, in the first years of the 20s. The methodology helped me understand what drives nations. It's not Putin, it's not the person. By the way, it's not Trump either. It's the forces that are working on us in history. And of course, leaders are the people that are speaking about those forces, or initiating this speech about those forces, or they are reacting to those forces. So this is what I believe is going to surprise a lot of people again in the next 5 years in Europe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. We're really short on time, so Ariel, you're the last one. Josh, I'm really sorry. I know it's your birthday, but I can make this wish come true. Send us a message with your question, and I'll send it to Professor.
Write down, Dikla, write down my email.
I'll send them your email, yeah.
I'll be very
Of course.
happy.
Yes, Ariel.
Hi, Prof. Josh, I'm just going to say, please, my birthday present to you. You can ask your question. There's no way. It's 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. You must ask your question, please. But
it's all good.
I'll write
Please
my
go ahead.
question. Go for
No,
it.
go. You go. I'm not
Come
going to
on.
ask.
You Bogan, go on. I'll write it down. I'm gonna leave this call. I'm gonna go. Ask a question. Please,
Yeah,
I beg.
go, Josh.
All right,
Come
fine.
on.
No, I was going to ask in terms of like you were mentioning before about how the world's becoming a lot more came from like a lot more globalized to being more like with these sort of different blocks and things like that. What aspect does, let's say, United Nations and global organizations have in terms of paying for these potential projects? So like in terms of like would the UN or WTO, do they have some level of involvement or ability to pay for part of these? Let's say if they're trying to redo a trade route through Mexico, for example, does United Nations or like WTO actually be involved in that, in the paying for that? Because ultimately that's something that most people would benefit from. Or is that something where when it's in a particular country that only those individual countries will pay for it?
Well, again, as far as I understand things at the moment, and as I said at the beginning of this lecture, it's really, we are in a very, very early stage of what's happening. And it's very hard to understand. But what I really feel is that even the international institutes are in deep crisis. The UN is not relevant anymore in many ways. World Trade Organization is also having troubles. A lot of nations don't agree to what the World Trade Organization is doing. So a lot of institutes are crumbling. Trump is already speaking about considering replacing another institute instead of the UN. Think about how the ICC in Hague is behaving in ways that a lot of nations do not agree. So a lot of Trump has receded from the World Health Organization. So you see that those institutes are crumbling. And if the great nation of the time is not supporting those institutes, it's only a matter of time that they are becoming, not important anymore. So relying on those institutes to take a very important action in order to avoid crisis, to avoid conflicts. Take a look. The UN is not even helping in here in the Middle East. See
Yeah,
how
no, I know.
everything is in troubles. See even how the Red Cross is not working. The Red Cross is not working. So things are happening, and I don't think we really understand how deep the crisis even is at the moment. That's the reason there are some people that are saying that we are already at a third world war. World War did not start in 1939. That's what most of the people think. World War II started at the beginning of the 30s with a lot of conflicts, China here, Japan here, different places. But it has accumulated into a great war only at the late 30s. So things at the beginning, they have their pace, and then there is a climax. Unfortunately, I hope we will not see 5 years like World War II, but you are going to experience a difficult decade. And you better think about it. A lot of things will change. A lot of things. Now, nowadays, it's very easy to be educated in these issues. It's not like it used to be before. You had to be nearby a library somewhere, nearby an academic somewhere that understand things to be able to be educated. Nowadays, you just educate yourself in those topics. The more you are educated, the more you will see also opportunities. Take, for example, the opportunity in Mexico, that very few people are aware of that opportunity. Around that canal or that route in Mexico, a lot of things will develop. Okay, so on the other hand, a lot of people that are in Panama, they don't know it yet, but that's it. It's over. Panama is over. The time of Panama, of the Jewish community in Panama is over. It's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was in Venezuela, and I said, the time of Jewish community in Venezuela is over. And they said to me, what are you speaking about? This is heaven here. Okay, I said, no, things are changing. The world is in constant transformation. We don't understand it. It takes decades to understand fully what happened. But we can try foresee things. Even though their validity is just, 60% correct, that's enough for us. And we will miss a lot of things. It's like what happened in Israel. People didn't understand, the establishment, even in Israel, didn't understand the forces that are working in the Middle East against Israel. They couldn't imagine that Hamas will do what they did. They couldn't imagine that Hezbollah will be part of what Hamas will do. They thought they were there, a terror attack, and that's it. But we have to understand the driving forces. The term is the driving forces of conflicts, driving forces of trade, driving forces of technology. This is the field I'm working on, trying to understand if I can figure out what kind of technologies will emerge in the future, what kind of institutes will emerge in the future, what kind of institute will disappear in the future. That's also very important. So in terms of world order and in terms of the institutes of the current world order, they are in trouble and they cannot be something important. Look how Trump is very, very aggressive in that matter. He says very specific, I don't want to be part of NATO anymore. It's crumbling. You are not doing what you should do. I don't want to be in World Health Organization. I don't care about openness and economic, the World Trade Organization. I'm going to put tariffs. I don't care. The world system has collapsed. I want Greenland. And everybody says, what the heck are you speaking about? He said, yeah, it has collapsed already. So I need to take care of myself. I need to take care of my interest. And that's the reason he speaks about, I will take Greenland. I will take Panama again. I'm not sure he will do it, but he will put a lot of pressure to be part and to at least push back the forces that have taken over those countries.
Thank you, Professor Pathig, so much. I'm sorry
Muchas gracias.
I'm sure we have many more questions, but we're running out of time. It's always a pleasure. I'll give you all Professor Pasig's email, and you can send him any questions that you have. Thank you so much for your
And I
time.
will put this lecture in my
on your YouTube page,
YouTube, and
and
I'll
send
open
me
it
the
only
link.
to you if you wish.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Would love that. Thank you very much, Professor Pasing. And